Thank you very much, Kat. As mentioned, my name is Keith Powell. Great to have everybody here this evening. I'm joined this evening, I'm the publisher of this series, and Derryll White and Erin Knutson are editors, co-writers on the project, and they both are, Erin is the executive director of the Columbia Basin Institute of Regional History, which is an unknown organization that does very valuable things. So what they do is their mandate is to preserve the heritage images of our region or our area. And I think at this point in time, we're looking for volunteers, so anyone that wants to help us scan images, that would be great. We also endeavor to represent the entire region. And we've had the pleasure of working together on 3 projects now. Forgotten Cranbrook was our first project that we worked on. The book was extremely well accepted and sold out in literally weeks. We have since reprinted it. We followed that up last year with Forgotten Kimberley, and it outpaced Cranbrook. It was very well accepted. And we're thrilled this fall to follow up with Forgotten Moyie, which is an interesting history. I have to admit, when I first thought of Moyie, all I knew about Moyie was driving through it. Mm-hmm. And there is so much more to that little community. And so we work closely along with the Moyie Community Association, and with their approval and cooperation, along with the High House Museum. And I recommend the High House Museum. How many have been to the Moyie High House Museum? Well, there's a few of you. I encourage you to do so. You have to be judicious when you go, because I think it's only open between 1 o'clock and 3 o'clock on Sundays. So you have to just check out what their schedule is. It's a bit tight, but it's well. Starting in May. Thanks, Steve. I recommend it. It's worth checking out. It focuses on the community very nicely. So this evening, what we're going to endeavor to do is talk about some of our favorite stories that we put together in the series, and just give you a little bit of a glimpse into the history of Moyie, Cranbrook, Kimberley. And I've had the pleasure of working independently and with the museum in Creston, and earlier this fall put out Forgotten Creston as well. And the thing that amazes me about the Kootenays is that every community is truly unique when it comes to its history, and such colorful characters and colorful history. I think as Kootenay, what would we call ourselves, Kootenayites? We should pinch ourselves once in a while, because we are really blessed with a great cast of characters and interesting stories that we're trying to capture, and we appreciate that. I'll put in one other plug for the Columbia Basin Institute of Regional History. We keep hearing stories of people coming in and cleaning out their attics and their basements, and suitcases of photos being tossed out into the landfill. So we encourage you, please don't do that. If you've got photos of the area, no matter how mundane to you, they are of interest to the Institute. We love to preserve those memories, tell great stories. And the old adage, a picture says 1,000 words, cannot be overemphasized, how important capturing and keeping those images are. Because once they're gone forever. And it's hard to recapture those stories. So anyways, we're going to get right into it, and Derryll and Erin are going to help me as we go through some of our favorite stories. And Cliff over here, he's going to be guiding us through. And Cliff, if you want to give us the first image. So here's our cover of the Forgotten Moyie, so 120 pages of regional history that focuses in on the community of Moyie and district. District, that includes places you've maybe never heard of, like Sifton City and New Montreal and Palmerton. Swansea, lots of, and of course Lumberton as well. So we've tried to include all that area. So let's go to our next image, and Erin, you're going to talk about that first image for us.
Absolutely, thanks Keith. This is the First Peoples of Chakos, Moyie. time immemorial. This was a really important piece of the book to note that the First Nations were the first peoples to inhabit Moyie before it became Moyie, and it was known as the Chakous River before it was named the Moyie River by the settlers eventually. This image is a great depiction of an Indigenous family. They would predominantly be Tinaha, or known as the Tinaha people today. Then they would have been known as the Kootenai Indian. The woman has what's known as a cradle board, which is a traditional transport unit for a child. They're often intricately woven with different artistic methods, and just to show both the function and culture of that time and those people. They were known as a river people. Moyie is also known as water, and the Kootenai people traversed the waterways early on, way before we came along and started traversing them. So I thought it was a good thing to point that out and to make that known, that they were the first peoples of Moyie. Thank you.
Thanks, Erin. That's an excellent introduction. Let's go to our next image, Cliff. So here's the Board of Trade of Moyie, and we have at the middle right, J.P. Farrell. He was a famous citizen of Moyie, and interestingly enough, back in 1899, Moyie billed itself as a future Coeur d'Alene of the East Kootenays. And so they were very optimistic about what was going to happen. And they talked about how picturesque it was and how delightfully it was situated. And it said, Moyie is the busiest and most talked about town in the East Kootenays. So it really sort of showed the optimism that was there in early Moyie. And these, if you go through, we won't name all these individuals in this photo, but if you actually take a look at it, there's some leading figures of the community that are represented in this photo, including F.J. Smythe, and of course, as I mentioned, J.P. Farrell in the middle. So definitely characters that were of note in early Moyie. Let's go to our next image.
Okay, so this is a view of Main Street. I was really interested in C.A. Foote. Foote was the kind of a Moyie merchant extraordinaire. He came in really early. He was a tailor. He kind of, for me, demonstrated a lot of what Moyie was about. He very early on, he joined both the Oddfellows and the Knights of Pythias. And then about 1903, he had a really acute appendix attack. It was going to kill him, they thought. So those two organizations got together and got a special train in from Cranbrook, brought him back to Cranbrook to the St. Eugene, and saved his life. And then he became the fire chief, and he ended up running in some of the hose reel races, and he did a lot in Moyie. The other thing that's really interesting in this photo, I think, is R.A. Smith's man climbing the wall. Smith was for a long time a shoemaker, and so that was one of the ways that he advertised his wares.
Yeah, Smith pops up in Moyie's history a lot. In fact, he had the Lakeview tourist cabins at one point in time. Yep. There's a great picture in the book of him on a rowboat on Moyie. And he was a great ambassador for the community as well. Let's go to our next image, Cliff. Derryll, you can talk to this one as well. So this is the subsequent second phase of the work in, so it was the second Moyie concentrator. Tell us about it, Derryll.
Yeah, so Moyie ran its course, and the mill shut down. The first concentrator they had, Cominco decided it wasn't all that useful, and so they built this one in 1925, and they built you can see there the Agnes MacPhail, which was a little dredge. There was a very powerful dredge, and it actually sucked all the rock, which was the residue from the first concentrator up off the bottom of the lake. They ran it through the concentrator, made more money than they ever thought they were going to make. And that's what you see today, that big pile of rock that as you go through, that's sitting in the Moyie Lake, was the residue from the second concentrator.
Yeah, interesting. So someone told me recently that when, maybe Steve, you can verify this or not, but there's a shaft that runs underneath the Moyie Lake, and it's got enough heat to it that when you see the ice freeze in the winter, you can actually see a line that goes across the lake. Now, I can't verify that for sure, but that's what I've heard. Okay, let's go to our next image. So Erin, talk to us about the Ladies of the Night of Moyie.
All right, this is Moyie's Women of the Night, which was somewhere around the early 1900s. So when considering the red light district, most people might think of Holland and Amsterdam, but there was very much a little red light district alive and well in Moyie at the advent of the town, and once it hit success with the mines of St. Aurore, St. Eugene, the doors started opening for entertainment, and the men here were often single and lonely. So business was booming in a couple of areas. They actually had 2 houses in town alongside schools and churches, and eventually at one point one did burn down. And they don't know who did it or if it was an accident, but it happened to burn down on a Sunday. So there was some speculation that it might have been something, nefarious. And that's about it. Once business closed and the mines closed, so did the red light district. And I thought it was important, we thought it was important to include that in the history and not gloss it over. Thank you.
Great, thanks Erin for that insight there. Let's go to our next image, Cliff. So here's the Cosmopolitan Hotel, and Derryll, tell us a story about these thirsty men standing on the sidewalk.
So Joe Niederstadt came into Moyie 1898. He didn't have a lot of money, but he really wanted to make beer. And his wife immediately started baking bread and sold the bread out of the house and supported, they had a family of 4. Niederstadt applied to the government, and we all know what happens when you apply to the government. He waited. He waited some time, and he finally got approval, and the next day he was down to Missoula and Spokane, and he came back with the hops and that kind of thing, and started making the beer that was to make Moyie famous. He went all over. At that point, Fort Steele was booming, so he sold the beer to the Fort Steele. He found every market he could, and of course the miners supported him very well. As things started to slow down, he looked forward and bought the Cosmopolitan Hotel in Moyie, and he ran that as well, and that's what they're standing in front of there is the Cosmopolitan. One of the reasons I really liked Niederstadt was all the time he was making all the booze and putting that side of life. He was also a family man, and he was the man who took out the kind of, he petitioned the government. He put a petition together to have a school, formed a school board, and brought the first school to Moyie. So I thought that kind of really reflected on what kind of a character the man was.
Thank you, Derryll. So the beer that made Milwaukee famous, well, no, the beer that made Moyie famous. We were looking for a Moyie beer label, but we did not find one. So on to our next image, and Erin's going to talk to these ladies from the Methodist Church, a little bit different from the red light district.
It's actually, this one is a portrait of Moyie's resilient women, which also includes the wonderful women of the Methodist Church. Moyie was made up of some very genteel but fierce and steely women who were able to hack it out with their male counterparts in terms of agriculture and farming, and raising a brood of children while having very little access to medical care and having basically to be homemaker, a nurse, doctor, and perhaps even deliver a baby when there was no one else around. So they really not only do they look good in this photograph, well put together, but they're also underneath all of that very steely and able to wield an axe. And I really thought that that was important to portray that in the book and to show them both as strong and genteel, which I believe they were.
Thanks, Erin. That picture intrigued me because I'm trying to figure out what that single gentleman in the middle is doing. Thank you for that insight. Next image, Cliff. So talking about genteel and then maybe the little bit wilder side of our Moyie women. Let's talk about that, Erin.
Sure, this is Wilderness Women as Esteemed Hunters and Trappers. So again, this shows a trio of women holding 3 rifles in their hands. Often women in the early 1900s, and especially in Moyie, were big game hunters and small game hunters, as can be seen here. And a few of them were independent fur traders and trappers as well, alongside their male counterparts, and were also able to forge out a living and sell on the market. So I think it's important to show that women have always been fierce and independent and quite capable, and that hunting is still alive and well even today. And more so then, as I think that it was more for sustainability and food resourcing than it is now.
Thanks, Erin. Can you imagine walking through the forest and encountering those rifle packing ladies? Okay, thanks for that insight. So let's go to our next image, Cliff.
There it is.
Okay, so here's an intriguing story. Tell us about the Sifton City Post Office, Derryll.
So one of the reasons I've really enjoyed doing all of these books is we find a lot of communities that people don't remember them all that much anymore. Sifton City was out on the Peavine. It was just up between Moyie, the end of Moyie Lake and Cranbrook, and it was in competition with Moyie and Cranbrook to have a post office. This was in 1898, and Sifton City got a post office before Moyie. And very quickly there was a fire and Sifton City kind of disappeared. But they had one really important export from Sifton City, and that was Mrs. McMahon, who saw what was going on, went off to Kamloops and did normal school, became a teacher, and she was the first teacher in the Moyie school.
Yes, and if you notice in the bottom corner of that photo,
Oh, right.
that is the existing building that used to house, so that's what it looked like when it was in the olden days. And in the corner, I took that picture last week, so it still stands. So we still have a piece of history of Sifton City. Sifton City was named after...
After I forget his first name, but he was the minister, federal minister in charge of immigration and a number of things. Cliff, yeah.
Cliff Sifton, yes.
Yeah. Thank you. Thanks, Mike.
Okay, yeah, good. So let's go on to our next image, Derryll. So here, Erin, if you could talk about the agricultural potential of Moyie as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So the cats and the chickens and the matrons of Moyie, but this is more about the broader community at large. And that Moyie is a great agricultural land, and it has been from the beginning due to the Peavine Valley, which allowed for rich irrigation and rich soil. So the early, do you call them Moyans? The early Moyans had great access to really good soil. So they were farmers, agriculturists, they grew beautiful orchards, they had markets, they had stores. They were able to make a living for themselves and the community with the rich land that they have. And though things have changed with infrastructure and the highways and modernity, it's still really a rich land and capable of growing good things.
Take a look. There's also your favorite guy.
The tabbies?
Yeah.
Oh, the tabbies?
No, the guy walking the...
Oh, this is also one of our favorites. Keith, do you want to talk
Sure,
to
I'll
the
talk.
cow and the guy?
So when Erin picked this photo, I had to look at it twice because here's a gentleman walking down the main street, I think, or one of the streets in Moyie, taking his cow for a walk. So I thought that was quite interesting. So it did talk to the agricultural potential of the valley. We know that sustainability is a buzzword these days, but Moyie was way ahead of the curve when it came to making sure that they had their own agricultural supplies. And you can imagine it was a mining community sort of in the middle of nowhere, really. So they did a good job of generating their own food, and whether it was hunting or farming the surrounding area, they were pretty effective in doing that. Cliff, let's go to our next image. Okay, so here's one of my favorite stories. So in 1936, there were two wrestlers driving from Spokane to Calgary to engage in a wrestling match, and they were driving the nefarious Moyie Bluffs, and came around the corner and clipped a Greyhound bus and sent the bus crashing over the edge, and it landed upside down on the railway tracks below. And so Paul Borish was the driver. He's on the upper left. And he was immediately put in jail and was jailed for a week until they decided that maybe he wasn't worth keeping, and they released him. And the ironic part about the whole story is almost 30 days later, the same wrestlers, but this time Brother Jonathan was driving, which is the wrestler to the right. And they were also going through the Moyie Bluffs on the way to Calgary for another match. And he clipped a truck and sent the truck over the bangs. And he was thrown in jail. So I think in the actual cut line of the book, it makes some reference to, if we can't teach the grunt and groan boys to drive, we should take their license away. So I thought that was a colorful story for Moyie. Okay, Cliff, what's our next one? Oh, Derryll, this is four photos in a row here that talk about Lumberton. So here you go.
Okay. So Lumberton's a favorite of mine. It was like Moyie, it was a big town, right? It had huge payroll. It was Michigan people that came in and bought out A.E. Wattsburg, and then they developed all up through Weaver Creek, Lamb Creek, and took out just a ton of wood. And you can see in the background there, they built a town in behind the mill for their employees. There was 40 or 50 houses, which ended up going in the Second World War. They ended up moving to Moyie and to Cranbrook, and I found that really interesting. A Cranbrook firm, was it? I forget their names. Anyway, they were the people who laid out all of the 23 miles of flume that Lumberton used, the BC Spruce Mills used, and it was very effective. And the crews that built it were incredibly. They're kind of like the Mohawk steel guys. I mean, some of the photos that we have shows them up on these 100-foot trestles, kind of dancing along as they were building the flume. And it went from basically from 1923 to about 1938. They cut themselves out, like all the other mills in our area, and went down. But they provided a lot of employment, and it's just really an interesting kind of piece of work to. They logged in a different way, and I think that the flumes were. Then Yak used those flumes. A number of people started to use that as a way of transporting logs.
Right. Thanks, Derryll. So the flumes if you actually go up to Cooper Lake, which was the head of the flumes, even to this day, you can see the remnants of the flume. And so it, like Derryll said, it ran some 23 miles down the Moyie Valley.
With tunnels.
And the amazing thing about it, I don't know if you've ever, I call them the lost tunnels of the Moyie flume, but if you can actually go and see the tunnels today. And the tunnels are punched right through the mountain because you have to remember those flumes were gravity fed, so it wasn't like they could go up, they had to go through the mountain. And the gentleman that, you remember the name of the two guys?
Ham.
Anyways, they were also real estate developers, so there's a couple of streets in Kimberley that are named after them because they developed a subdivision up in Kimberley as well. So they, as Derryll mentioned, were very progressive when it came to building these flumes, amazing structures. And not only in the Moyie, but as Derryll mentioned, Yak, Bull River, and I believe they also may have built one around the Crow's Nest Pass somewhere as well. They were very prolific when it came to building. Okay, so that's an overview of Lumberton and the amazing things that happened there. Let's go to our next image, Cliff. So I'll talk a little bit about Charlie Yoshi. Charlie was a Japanese Canadian. He worked on the railway, started in Revelstoke, was eventually transferred to Moyie. He worked on the Moyie subdivision for many years, retired in Moyie. Was a beloved character within the community, and he was known to hand out candies and so forth to all the children, and he was a favorite throughout the community. In 1942, when the Japanese were interned, he was, his house was confiscated, his belongings were confiscated, and he was sent to an internment camp in the Slocan Valley. And the Moyie residents were so distraught over that they got a petition together to see if they couldn't get him to come back. Well, he did. He was released and brought back at the end of the war, and he resettled in Moyie. But the thing that he missed the most is when they confiscated his property, they took his radio. And he wrote many letters pleading if he could have his radio back. He had one of these console radios. And finally they said, "We don't have your radio. We sold it for when they dispersed all the property of the Japanese Canadians, but we'll send you a check for $17. You can go buy your own radio." So that was Charlie's story. He lived in Moyie for many years, died in 1963 in an apartment in Cranbrook. He was a colorful character and certainly did his community credit. One of his jobs in the community was to go down to the train every day, grab the mail bag and bring it up to the post office. So he was sort of that helpful kind of guy. Okay, let's go to our next image. Okay, I'm going to talk a little bit about the McMahon brothers. So this may be the Moyie claim to fame. The McMahon brothers, the patriarch actually built the Kootenai Hotel, which was one of the main hotels in Moyie. And he had 3 sons. The 3 sons went on to become industrialists across Western Canada, primarily in the oil and gas industry. This is the sons in early 50s, maybe late 50s in Calgary, and they were distinguished business people. If you've ever heard of McMahon Stadium, where the Calgary Stampeders play, well, it was financed by the McMahon brothers. They were short of money, and the McMahon brothers put up $250,000 in cash and said, "We'll also carry the loan for another $750,000 so that they could build McMahon Stadium." So if you just go to the next image, Cliff, here we have one of the McMahon brothers kicking the football at the opening of the McMahon Stadium in Calgary. And so this is the family picture in Moyie, the patriarch of the McMahon family, and some of the neighborhood kids as well. So the McMahons were definitely famous within their community. So a great legacy for the community today. Okay, Cliff, let's talk about the train that went off. So 1925, as the train rounded the bend, the tracks gave way because of a washout, and it tumbled into the Moyie Lake. They did recover portions of the train, but there's still portions that are still at the bottom of the lake. They figure it's around 200 feet in water where it's at. In 1962, interestingly enough, a couple of scuba divers dove down, did find portions of the wreck, but what fascinated me even more is they found a 1929 Chevy in pristine condition at the bottom of the lake. And no damage, wasn't in an accident. The puzzle is, how did it get there? Well, my theory is that someone was driving across the ice and they went through. So, so interesting history about the Moyie train wreck. Thanks, Cliff. Okay, here's our final image on Moyie for this evening, and Erin's going to talk to the pirates of the Moyie Township.
All right, in 1903, there was a production of The Pirates of Penance put on by the Moyie theatrical community at the Moyie Lyceum Theatre, which was built in 1898, or the very late 1890s. It really reflected the importance of art and culture and theater to the community of Moyie. Though rustic by nature, they still had the time and the inspiration and the energy to celebrate the arts and to put on theater. It was quite successful. They had many musicals that went through, starting in 1898 until the theater closed in, I believe it was in 1933. And in that time period, that was something that the elites attended in Moyie. It was just when the curtain was raised, even the standing room was at a premium. So a production of this caliber brought out the most of Moyie's elite. And that really says something just about the heart and of the community and the people there.
Thanks, Erin. It really speaks to the culture of the community as well. And it's an amazing image. Key City Theatre, you've got nothing over the Moyie Theatre group. So just talking about Moyie just for a moment, established in 1893, at one point in time, well over 1,000 people lived in the community, and it really was the start of the Caminco experience, which was then called CMNS, Canadian Mining and Smelting Company, right? And I always wondered, like, what happened to Moyie? Because the mine was very rich, and the official line is they ran out of ore. However, I don't believe that was the case. I think there's lots of ore there. I think what happened, and this is just my own theory, is that they found the North Star and the Sullivan and Kimberley, which were way richer with way more potential, and they turned their attention to Kimberley. And I hate to say it, but they sort of turned their back on Moyie based on the fact that there was such a rich find. Wow. You look at the Sullivan, ran for 100 years, richest mine in the world. And so I guess in that case they were right.
Just one thing that we did discover, which surprised me, was the St. Eugene mine was so rich and so powerful that it actually influenced the building of the BC Southern Railway. I mean, CPR saw right away that they had a market there and a product that was going to make them a lot of money. So there were lots of arguments about where the station and that was going to go in Moyie, and it went outside and then came back in. But in terms of the economic impact on East Kootenay, Moyie was the beginning, and it was amazing.
Yeah, so it was a pleasure to work on that project, and you know, this evening we're just trying to give you a glimpse as to what that community was all about. We, of course, can't go through every image, but every image has a great story to it. So, Cliff, let's go to our next one, Forgotten Cranbrook. We're going to just talk about a few of the images that we included in Forgotten Cranbrook. And this is just a real quick overview, so let's go to image number one. So, the world-famous Cranbrook Bugle Band. Let's talk about that, Derryll.
Yeah, this is one of my favorites. We're just about to start a fundraising campaign to do a website on the Bugle Band. The Bugle Band, of course, closed 3 or 4 years ago, finally wrote it off. We have about 5,000 images at the Institute, as well as a number of artifacts, and this museum as well has a number of artifacts. It was an amazing story. I mean, these were young ladies, 14, 15, up to 18, 19, coming out of the Second World War. It started as a military band, a women's band in Cranbrook, and then morphed into the Mount Baker Bugle Band. Last count that I went through, looking at all of the records and that, over probably close to 3,000 young women in Cranbrook were part of the bugle band at one time or another. And it was this city's biggest ambassador. I mean, they went everywhere. They went to Expo, they went all over Canada, they went down into the United States. They went into Fort McLeod for the Santa Parade in the wintertime. These were really amazing young ladies who showed this community well, and I'm really sad that they're still not here.
Right, so nice to get a glimpse of that. And when Derryll talks about artifacts, we've got rooms full of memorabilia from the bugle band era for sure. Let's go to our next image, Cliff. So this is the early Cranbrook Board of Trade. So their mandate was to promote Cranbrook and really establish it as a thriving business community as well as a tourism mecca. And so these astute gentlemen gathered. They were the predecessors of what we know today as the Chamber of Commerce, and their mandate was to really represent the community and the business community. And they did a pretty good job of doing that and established Cranbrook as sort of the go-to place in the southern interior. So hats off to them. Let's go to our next image, Cliff. So Erin, could you just talk about this image for a moment?
Sure. This is the Ktunaxa school children of 1900. The Ktunaxa school children featured in this image were part of the federal government's attempt to integrate First Nations children into mainstream Canadian culture. The St. Eugene Mission Residential School was run by the Catholic Church and was presented as an ideal opportunity for the Ktunaxa children to receive a good education. According to an excerpt from the prospector dated November 15th, 1912, the parents were excited to bring their children to school. The parents, it reads, are so anxious to have their children attend school that several on applying had to be refused owing to the want of room in the old school buildings, it said. Eventually, the children underwent rigorous training and adhered to a steady stream of subjects including grammar, Bible history, writing, reading history, geography, catechism, and physical education. Reverend Felix Beck oversaw the school in 1912, and in his report he writes, "The children are attentive, apply themselves, and have made satisfactory progress." This was indicative of the propaganda perpetuated by the government that forced children and families apart, while allegedly abusing, neglecting, and subjecting the children to cultural assimilation. There.
Thanks. So the residential school is certainly a sad legacy right here in our own backyard. Let's go to our next image, and here's a little bit of a cultural connection to that as well. So let's just talk about that image for a moment, if you could, Erin.
Absolutely. And this image shows maybe a lighter side of the residential schools. Although not ideal, the students had many opportunities to learn, to educate themselves, and the music program was really strong. Eventually, a girls' string band was formed, and they played across the communities and were quite well known. So they, despite the confines or in the parameters of these schools, they did have the opportunity to learn and to grow. And there was a really, really good quote. But it's not here, but it just, despite some of the horrors and despite some of the trauma that went on, there were perhaps a few good things in these schools.
Yeah, so again, highlighting the cultural aspect of it. Let's go to our next image, Cliff. So this is downtown Cranbrook. You may recognize Baker Street. This was the Bank of Commerce, not to be mistaken with the building that stands today, which is where Cranbrook Photo is. This was actually one block down across from the Cranbrook Post Office, where the Royal Bank sits right now. So you can see the majesty of the downtown of Cranbrook. We all have our hearts skip a beat when we think of knocking down the post office, but that it was a reality. So that large building in the background behind the post office was a major building in downtown Cranbrook for many years. And let's go to the next image and find out its fate. So there was a large fire in the late 50s that took that building down. And we used that image in Forgotten Cranbrook book and found that it was a sort of a captivating image because it not only talked about the Great Fire, but it also reminded us that Overweighty has a long history in Cranbrook. So that was taken from the roof of the Overweighty store at the time. If you look real close, you can see businesses that you might identify today, such as Page's Book Emporium would be in one of those buildings as well. And on the corner, you see the Mount Baker Hotel as well. So downtown Cranbrook has lots of stories in itself. Let's go to our next image, Cliff. Okay, I'll talk to this one too. So I have an interest in aviation, and not that I've never actually piloted anything, but I do have sort of a fascination with all the things that have happened in Cranbrook related to aviation, and unfortunately some of them have been disastrous. But this was, I just thought this was an interesting photo because it talked to the early Cranbrook Municipal Airport. These two young women are sitting on a plane that obviously is sitting on the runway of the Cranbrook Municipal Airport. And if you drive down Industrial Park Road number 1, you are actually driving down the airstrip. And there's probably more than a few people that remember that. I grew up in Jaffrey as a kid. Every 2 weeks we'd come into Cranbrook for groceries. My dad would take me to the post office. I would come out of the post office and be scared out of my skin because there would be a plane taking off right over top of downtown Cranbrook, and it would be rattling and screaming and whatever. It was always a scary experience. But I just thought that was a really neat photo, and really talks about the aviation history of Cranbrook. And I look forward to maybe exploring that a little bit more in future publications. Let's go on to our next image, and this is the Otis Staples sawmill out at Wycliffe. And Derryll, let's talk to that one.
Okay. So Staples was one of the many there's a huge influx of people from Minnesota that came in here 1902, 1903. He was had a lumber mill in Minnesota and cut himself out of timber there. Came out on the CPR and went, oh my God, look at all the trees. And so he came into Wycliffe. Wycliffe at one point had almost 2,000 people. I mean, we wouldn't know it today, but that's kind of what I like about the history parts of this thing. And he brought a bunch of new things in, like he brought in railway logging and had logging railways that ran all the way almost up to Premier Lake from Wycliffe out towards Wardner. And just a side light on him that, Bob, you'll like this. He was a fisherman, and he was casting out of his boat on St. Mary's Lake, hooked himself in the eye, and died very quickly. He got septic, and they took him down to Spokane, but it was not to be. His sons ran the mill for quite a long time. They also ran a contracting firm in Kimberley that built a lot of Kimberley. But it was just an amazing kind of one of those sawmills that fed all of the expansion into Saskatchewan in the 1920s, and yeah.
Yeah, Otis Staples was an interesting character. My wife is from Minnesota, and we had the opportunity of going to Stillwater, Minnesota, which was his hometown, and there's a building there that says the Otis Staples Sawmill. So that was his first venture into lumbering, and then he brought his skills to Canada. In fact, he met with H.R. McMillan, who at that point in time was the chief forester in BC, and he said, where would I go to establish a sawmill? And he said, what kind of lumber would you like to cut? And he said, well, I want pine. He says, I recommend the St. Mary's Valley. And that's where he established. So at one point in time, as Derryll mentioned, it was a huge mill. I think there was close to 600 guys that worked at the Otis Staples. And as you go to Kimberley, You look down on the flat, and there's houses being developed down there now, but right where the railway tracks cross the St. Mary's, that was Otis Staples' footprint. That's where the mill was. Okay, let's go to our next image. So as I mentioned, I had the privilege of working along with the museum in Creston. And I tell you, our local museums are the most valuable asset that we have in our communities, in my mind, because they contain so many fascinating stories and images. Creston has got this small museum that houses 10,000 images. And it just gives a snapshot of the community. It's tremendous. So I had a chance to work with Tammy Bradford, and we put together this book, looked at the various images from Creston and tried to tell a story. And it went together well. Let's look at our first image from Creston. So this was Dr. George Henderson came to Creston as the first resident doctor in 1908. And George Henderson was not just a doctor, but he was a major player in the community. So anything that happened in Creston, chances are Dr. Henderson was in the middle of it. Whether it was the badminton club, the bowling club, the curling club, he was president of them all. And he was connected to Creston very, very closely. Let's go to our next image. So this goes back to the days of William Bailey Groman. His vision, of course, was to convert the Creston Flats into agricultural land. And this is late 1800s, and they were already starting to dredge and build dikes so that they could sustain that farmland. And of course, Bailey Groman ran out of money. He never ran out of vision, but he ran out of money. He went back to England and couldn't raise the money, so his project sort of went sideways. But years later, that took place with the diking of the Kootenay, and now the Creston Flats are probably the richest agricultural land in the Kootenays by far. Okay, and this is the flood of 1948. So the flood of 1948 throughout the Kootenays was very devastating. It flooded the flatlands of the Creston Valley, and it prompted the politicians of the day to start to think, we've got to do something to offer some flood control. And we're going to see why in our next few images. So, Cliff, we're going to introduce Forgotten Kimberley. So this is the project that we worked on in Kimberley. Again, a fascinating community. And let's look at our first image. That looks like the flood of 1948.
It sure is. These are the brave faces of the Mark Creek flood. So speaking of flood preparation, out of the great 1948 flood in Kimberley came the Mark Creek flume, and that was just a spin-off of all the damage and destruction that happened over a very intense and short period of time, where over 50 structures, homes, and businesses were devastated. The flood actually split the city into two different sections, just during its trajectory over the course of its course. And through this time, men and women and the Red Cross got together, sandbags, days, nights, to try to clean everything up. It was really a disaster. So 100 homes were evacuated, and people didn't really see this coming. So it was quite a natural disaster for 1948. And so they stepped up and they found a solution.
Right. I don't know if anyone's had an opportunity to read my book, Kookanusa Burning, or not, but it delves into the flood of 1948 a fair bit, because that was the impetus of building of the Libby Dam that dammed the Kootenay. And what got the attention of the politicians in the U.S. was the fact that Vanport, Washington disappeared as a result of that flood. And Vanport, Washington was a city of 20,000 people. And it was at the mouth of the Columbia, and it was totally obliterated and washed away. And it was somewhat ironic that it was the poor, the working class, that were the inhabitants of Vanport. And the government realized they had to do something, and that really prompted them. I guess that prompted also the Columbia Basin Treaty, River Treaty, that also saw storage dams built in the West Kootenays as well. So we still see that legacy today affecting our area. Okay, let's go on to the Blarchmont ski jump. Tell you what, we'll give you extra marks tonight if you can tell us what the origin of the name Blarchmont is. Anybody know? Well, I'll tell you. There were three key individuals in Cominco, or CMNS at that time. There was Blaylock, there was Archibald, and there was Montgomery. And they put their names together and came up with Larchmont. And so that's how that little segment of Kimberley was named. But its claim to fame, if you go up to the Save-On-Food, you can look up the bank and you can imagine people jumping off of that ridge. So, anybody ever witnessed that? No?
Yep.
Okay, there we are. So I came across somebody the other day that was telling me stories about people jumping off the great ski jump. Ski jumping in the late 30s, early 40s, maybe even a little bit earlier than that, was a big deal in the Kootenays. There was a competitive circuit, Rosslyn, Revelstoke, Kimberley, and a couple others, including Kingsgate. Yep. And Kingsgate may have been the most unique because you started at the top of the jump in the US, and when you jumped off, you landed in Canada. So it was an interesting experience. So predating even the Kimberley Ski Club, was the fact that there was a lot of jumpers. And I guess I attribute that to the fact that there were a lot of Scandinavian people at that point in time, and they brought their sport with them. And they had real pride in the ski jumping. Okay, let's go to our next image. This is early
Marysville. And Marysville always teetered on whether it was a community or wasn't a community, and as it grew, and as Chapman Camp grew and people started to spill out of the concentrator into Marysville, it became quite a solid community. The Evans brothers were longtime residents of Marysville, and Evans Mountain, Evans Creek, there's a number of things up to St. Mary's that are reminiscent of those prospectors. Yeah, I don't know what more to tell you. Marysville also had a very large smelter. I don't know if you know that, but we cover that in the book as well. It was a wonderful smelter built to smelt the ores of the Sullivan, which were very complex ores. Unfortunately, the fellow who finally got hired to design the smelter was not the person who was supposed to design the smelter. It was his brother, and he really didn't know a lot about smelters, so it was a failure.
It only lasted a few years. It was a huge complex, and yeah. So next image. So this is the Koi Cup champions in 1926. I wrote a book, sort of based on several of the characters in this team. The unique thing about this hockey team, they did win the BC Koi Cup, which is emblematic of senior hockey championship in 1926. And their goalie, sitting in the middle, was a guy named Jim Peaver. And unique thing about him, he only had one arm. And but he was this ace goalie. They went to Vancouver to play in the championship tournament, and the Vancouver skaters skated by him and gave him a hard time and said, "This is going to be easy." But Peaver stood on his head, kept the puck out of the net, and Kimberley won the championship. And they were also sort of the predecessors of the famed and storied Kimberley Dynamiters. And so Kimberley, I always said, and I mentioned this in the book, and I've mentioned it in a couple of my novels as well, if you showed up in Kimberley with a hard hat, you'd have a job. If you showed up with a hard hat, a lunch bucket, and a hockey stick, you probably had a career. Because Cominco was always looking for hockey players, and if you could play hockey, and baseball maybe,
too, yeah.
You pretty much were guaranteed a good job at the mine. Okay, let's go on to the Larchmont School.
Okay, so if you remember, I talked about Lumberton being moved. The Larchmont School, in its beginning, was the Lumberton School. And when Lumberton went down, during the 1940s, Kimberley expanded. The school district expanded and they needed to build a new school. Unfortunately, that was at a point in the war effort where they couldn't get materials, so they moved the Lumberton school there, and you can still, if it's still there, you can still see some of the peaks of that in the middle of it. It got expanded a lot, but that's it. That's the Larchmont School.
I have a friend that lives in Kimberley. She lives in a house she swears was moved from Moyie, so it's quite common to move houses, Moyie, Lumberton, into these other communities, but it must have been quite a job to move a school.
Yeah, it was. They cut it in half.
Let's go to our next image. So here's the Kimberley Pipe Band, brass band, I should say. So at one point in history, probably early 1920s, the brass bands were extremely popular, and every community had one, and they competed against each other from the Crow's Nest Pass to Creston. Creston had a brass band, Cranbrook had a brass band,
Fort Steele.
Fort Steele had a brass band, so this was Kimberley's championship brass band, and the two gentlemen in the front are related, and many of the band were their relatives. So anyways, let's go to our next image. And that also leads us into a conversation of the famous Kimberley Pipe Band, which of course is well over 100 years old. And like the Bugle Band, they're ambassadors to the community, travel all over the world.
Yep.
And this was the first band, Scottish roots, and they did a wonderful job of representing the community and continue to do so. Okay, let's go to our last, second to last image. Derryll, this is an intriguing picture. Tell us about it.
So this is one of my favorite stories. Those are gondola cars. They weigh between 20 and 40 tons. One of them broke loose up at the mine, came all the way down through town. It was doing 35 miles an hour through town. By the time it hit Chapman Camp, it was doing 55 miles an hour. It went all the way through Marysville and didn't stop until it hit the grade going up to Wycliffe. And then when a guy jumped on and set the brakes and stopped it. What's amazing is that it crossed, I figured it out, at least 12 crossings, railway crossings. And nobody was hit, nobody was hurt. And at one point, a couple of people tried to get ahead of it and to kind of notify some of the people in Marysville that it was coming, but it just rolled right on through.
Right, so just one of those fascinating, intriguing little stories you could come across when you start looking into the history of our communities. One more image. Let's wrap it up with some colorful Kootenai characters. And do you want to talk to those, Erin?
And what would a community be without its colorful characters? So the wonderful tie hacker with a hat on the right, and he's our poster boy for our new marketing campaign. And he lived to be 91 years old. He worked for the CPR. He was a rough and tough tie hacker in his day. He lived in very rugged, tough conditions. But despite those conditions, he managed to live to 91. So definitely a hardworking man and a reflection of that time and place. So they often lived a very solitary life, defined by long hours, uncertain conditions. Safety was not really an issue. They braved freezing temperatures, dead toenails or dead toes, and hopefully, at the end of the day, they made a large enough haul to support themselves and to feed themselves when it was all said and done. But at the advanced age of 91, this well-worn man suggests that he lived a life and he lived it well. The second man is our one-man band, Cliff James. He was an immigrant from Liverpool. And his family immigrated over along with most of the early residents that lived in Marysville, who were not born Canadian or who were not born in Canada. He started out trying to do whatever he could to make a living. He started out in mines, eventually found his way to music. So he basically played every instrument known to man, including the harmonica and the guitar.
All at one time.
All at one time, yes. And he was actually broadcast live. He was one of the first Canadians in the East Kootenay to be broadcast live on a station. I'm trying to remember, there it is. So it was KXLY Spokane, Washington in 1955. So that was a really proud moment for a young immigrant who crossed over on a 7,000-ton voyage from Liverpool. It was he actually traveled in steerage. So there you go, coming from steerage to making his way to a well-known station.
There were some other musicians that came from Liverpool, wasn't there?
Yes, yeah.
Yes, I think so. The Fab Four. So that wraps up our presentation. What we wanted to do is give you a glimpse of some of our favorite stories, and really, that it just skims the surface. Again, going back to the flumes of Lumberton, it was D. Wolfenham to build those flumes. And as I mentioned, there's 2 streets in Kimberley, D. Wolf Street and Ham Street, that are named after those gentlemen. So it's amazing when you start looking into the history of these communities, how closely connected each community is, and the colorful characters that make up. So it's been an absolute pleasure to work with Derryll and Erin on these projects and put together this series. People have asked us what our future is. We are looking at possibly doing Forgotten Fort Steele, and there may be some other communities that we look at focusing in on as well in the future, because every community has a story and we love to tell it. Thank you again for coming. Thank you to our sponsors. Thank you to the Cranbrook History Center. I happen to be the chair of the board this year. I recommend don't show up at a meeting because you might end up as the chair. But it's a great facility. It's a jewel in our crown that sometimes we forget about. And this History Center is very valuable to this community. We're always looking for members, we're always looking for support, and we're looking for volunteers as well. So anytime that you can pitch in and help out, we certainly appreciate it. And it's, our existence is always tenuous as a museum or as a body, just like the Columbia Basin Institute. We rely on the community, we rely on the city. So if you ever see any of the city fathers, please thank them for their support of these cultural institutions, because quite frankly, Cranbrook's had a challenge preserving some of its history. And I think if we can preserve it, it really speaks well to our community, and we appreciate your support. And Derryll, would you like to have closing words?
Yeah, I just have one footnote. These books that we've done, they're all partnerships with one of the other museums, whether it's the Cranbrook History Center, the Kimberley Museum, the High House Museum, the Creston Museum. And so it's really important that that you all support your museums, right? They're people that work hard, but they're mostly volunteers. As Keith said, most of them are not financed very well. And so that's one of the things that we've done, is we've made partnerships with these museums and then use that to just put their photos out to let you know that they really are an integral part of all of our communities.
And just to let you know, I'm the publisher of the series, and we're able to flow some money back. So literally, we've raised $1,000 in support of the Columbia Basin Institute of Regional History and the work they do. So, you just can't do it without somewhat of a budget, and we're pleased to be able to contribute to that to some degree.